I don't know. I'm not gonna go to Starbucks TV. I'm just not. I don't think. I don't think anybody is.
Made Daily. Hello and welcome to the Made Daily podcast. I'm John Michael Thomas.
I'm Pierre Hegeman.
Made Daily covers our favorite stories from tech to social media.
Our expert thoughts and opinions about information security, website design, and development.
And other random stories from across the internet. Let's get into it. This week's episode of the Made Daily podcast is made possible by Cinemechanics, the premier camera and lens rental house. When you're shooting your next film, commercial, or popular streaming TV series, Cinemechanics will ensure your project stays next level.
And Made Daily version 5, the all-in-one secure website builder with built-in data collection tools and secure customer portals. And one of our way back internet favorites, one of the internet's first viral videos, Bad Day.
He had a bad day.
Did have a bad day. Happens to everyone.
Insert bad day clip by the magic of editing.
Today, we're going to be starting with Crowdstrike. Now, if you haven't heard about Crowdstrike, then you probably haven't been watching the news, which, good for you. However, a couple months ago, there was a massive outage all across the whole entire internet caused, well, kind of by Crowdstrike, kind of by Microsoft. Crowdstrike, if you're not familiar with it, is it's like an endpoint security software used by a lot of large enterprises. It kind of replaced the old antivirus. So endpoint protection keeps you from, it detects malicious behavior on your systems. It can act as an antivirus. So it's generally considered one of the better protections for large organizations to keep their users and their user devices secure. So what happened with
Norton before that?
Norton? Yeah, I mean, Norton has an endpoint protection. So CrowdStrike kind of works in the similar space to that.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So one of the unique features to these security products is they have to run because they're looking for suspicious software, suspicious network connections, suspicious memory activity, things that are happening. You could be getting a ransomware attack. And so they can look at what's going on in the operating system and say, oh, this software is trying to encrypt a bunch of things. We're going to block it, right? So in order for that to work, the CrowdStrike software has to operate at a very, very, very low level in the system. That means very close to the hardware, right? So it actually it hooks itself into the system command processor. It's called the kernel for Windows, right? The thing that drives the whole operating system. And so that's the brain, if you to quote the old movie Hackers. Anyway,
or if you've ever had a kernel panic.
Yeah, exactly. So since CrowdStrike needs to access the kernel, it has basically unrestricted access to everything on the system. So a flaw in the CrowdStrike software can very easily crash the whole computer. And that's really what happened. It was a malformed update that came down. Now, CrowdStrike is saying that, yes, their update had a flaw, but it was actually a Windows update that so as Windows made a change right on their side that actually caused this flaw to then start crashing computers. So both sides are kind of pointing fingers at the other. I would tend to blame the software provider over the operating system usually. In this case, it's really hard, and legally, I think the legal battles are going to stretch on for probably for years. But anyway, what happened is there was basically a mismatch in the number of input fields that the driver was expecting based that. Okay, let me back up a little bit. The driver was expecting a different number of input fields than the update actually had, which caused the driver to try to access memory that was out of the bounds for what it could do, which caused the system to crash. So it was a faulty update, and it caused, if you're familiar with the blue screen of death It's been a Windows term forever. It caused that over and over and over, right? You couldn't boot the system. The only way to solve it was to boot into safe mode in Windows, which is like a really
Oh, geez.
restricted version. Go in and delete that update, and then the system would boot normally, and it would start working. Now, the problem with that is it can't be done remotely, and it can't be done in an automated way. So for all of these companies, there were thousands and thousands of large companies affected. For all of these companies, they had to send techs out, and for each device that was
So they're doing it
affected,
one machine at a time.
one machine at a time.
Oof.
And to further complicate that, some of the machines are encrypted with with a Windows sort of disk level encryption called BitLocker. And in order to be able to decrypt the BitLocker and access the drive, they would need the BitLocker keys. And in order for them to have that, the organization need to have good key management, good hygiene on their systems, which, as we know, a lot of organizations, even the largest, best IT organizations in the world, don't necessarily keep track of these things. So if they didn't have those BitLocker keys, there was no way they could recover these systems, and they would
What's
have
a
to essentially.
BitLocker key?
BitLocker is the encryption system. It's kind of like
Oh,
File
gotcha.
Vault on a Mac.
Yeah.
It's a Windows version of File Vault, and so you need a recovery key if you need to access the computer without the password, right? Or if you need to be able to access it in a restricted way, like the safe mode boot, right?
So you've got 50 machines
Mm-hmm.
across your organization, and each machine has its own BitLocker key. How
Yeah.
is somebody storing the BitLocker keys?
So right, the organization has to set up a system to maintain those and keep them updated, and it's challenging, especially when you consider organizations like, one of the hardest affected was Delta Airlines. Now they're still investigating why they were so hard hit, but
Hmm.
when they have thousands of employees, each with their own system, the managing that is a really, really large challenge. So anyway, CrowdStrike, the, the outage hit, like I said, thousands of companies, and we're looking at probably billions and billions of dollars in losses due to this one outage. And it was, serious things like 911 systems went out, hospitals went
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
I had one source say that they had to cancel all of their cardio stents and bypass surgeries because they couldn't access the systems. So it is absolutely certain that people were injured or possibly died because of this outage, and that kind of brings home how important it is to have these systems well maintained. It's kind of funny, even though this was actually caused by an update. One of the best ways to prevent and protect yourself against this sort of thing is to keep your software actually updated. And
Hmm.
we talk about this all the time. Talked about it last episode.
Yeah.
Update, update, update. Keep your things up to date.
We don't know how often Windows and CrowdStrike are talking to each other during these updates, but it seems like they might, if they're running the infrastructure as kind of two large enterprises, you think they might maybe consider in the future, having some environment where they can test a little bit better, because it seems like something you could have maybe found if appropriate testing was done.
Yeah, so they're pointing fingers back and forth
Right.
at each other for sure. I think that you know, this has probably been a flaw in the CrowdStrike driver for a
Oh.
very, very long time, right? The fact that it's, input validation is one of the core things that a security professional looks at, right? And
Hmm.
it's the cause of so many flaws on the web and on the operating system when you're not checking to make sure that what's coming in from outside your system, which you cannot control, to what's being processed by your system, which you can control. You gotta make sure that inputs are what you expect. You're not you don't have an extra input field that you're not expecting, right? That can cause problems. In databases, it can cause problems in your software. Maybe it'll start looking for something it's not supposed to be looking for, and it can cause these kinds of issues, right? So
So
input validation.
How do we improve something like this?
Well, we as consumers of, say, CrowdStrike or Microsoft Windows, we can't really, other than keeping our systems patched, we don't really have control over that. This is going to be up to the software vendors to prevent in the future. And the best way for that is, they need to have a good software development lifecycle where they're constantly testing their software, constantly, when they're making updates, they have to do regression tests, make sure that, did I introduce any bugs? Did I reintroduce any bugs that we used to have that we had fixed previously? And, and then again, on the client side, when you're executing updates or signatures or whatever, when you're taking a command from somewhere else and executing on a local system, that has to get validated. So CrowdStrike really needs to update their agent to make sure that it's only operating within known good parameters.
71 million per company. You hope that that's being covered by some insurance, because holy cow, that's a big hit to a company.
Yeah, I would expect that there will be some
60 million airlines.
I would expect there will be some lawsuits coming up. And it also kind of highlights the risk that we as a society take on when we trust these massive corporations with huge portions of our infrastructure. When we have NASA outsourcing all of their space flight to a private company, to me that's a kind of a similar problem, right? I'm not one to say that NASA is wrong. Maybe it's cheaper, maybe it's better. I don't know, but I do know that private companies have way less accountability, way less sort of oversight than public companies. And when you're talking about things like hospital infrastructure, airline infrastructure, those are almost to the level of public utilities and probably need stronger oversight than what is there already, in my opinion.
Should we move on to our next story?
Yeah.
We're gonna go to talk about YouTube first.
Right on.
So this is something I saw that I thought was really interesting. YouTube is totally revamping the TV app to make it to enhance user and creator experiences by basically becoming a major streamer in some ways. And the cool thing is, like, they're letting creators now organize videos into episodes and seasons, giving their channels a Netflix-like feel, which it's interesting because, one, it's a very simple UI move, I would think. It's categorization, organization of movies. People have been doing this kind of anyway, and like foldering in the channels, different playlists in the channels. But it's a really interesting shift in seeing how content creators may now like be able to move into series. And there's been a lot of content creators have built, large businesses on YouTube, but people haven't really gotten into this for like narrative content in a big way. And I think this is a massive opportunity for independents, just people who just are like regular old content creators with an opportunity to make stuff. But I think this is really opening the door. And they're saying, the other new feature is cinematic previews that play on creator pages. So you can have your own Netflix page essentially. And I think it's a really interesting update.
So how would you say like a business could invest in kind of serial content to make use of this sort of update from YouTube? It's kind of like Twitch streaming, but for YouTube, right? Or is it different from that?
It's not. Yeah, it's different from that. So
Okay.
it's not. Think of it like you go to, Squid Game was a massively popular Netflix show, and you go to the page, it's got a big art, big banner ad at the top. The banner ad plays, big banner art, and then the episode's all there, and you can get all the information of all the episodes. You basically have that power now. So if you wanted to create, a show in your basement, you wanted to create your own Wayne's World, you could do that and do it in a narrative form where, people have been doing podcasts and video, video or video sketch comedy, but and then people upload short films and things to YouTube. But I think this really opens up. I think that it's massive. I think we are not going to understand how huge of a move this is for them. When you think about young kids and they only watch YouTube, like a lot of kids watch YouTube. They don't really watch even streaming platforms. They're not into that sort of stuff. And I think from the way the world of content creators have grown, especially, on Reels, YouTube Shorts, TikTok, people kind of putting out their own stuff and people putting out news, you can easily see that people are just going to initially start putting out their like daily news shows. And then I think it's going to be like very, very short order when we see somebody breaking out with some narrative thing, especially with the fact that it's so easy to shoot stuff now. And, they're remaking, was it 400 Days Later, the zombie movie? And when they shot that originally, they shot it on, not 400 Days Later.
400 days after the 28 days?
No, 28 Days Later. 400 Days Later is a movie I worked on. That's funny. 28 Days Later, when they made 28 Days Later, they shot it on mini DV. Now they're shooting it on an iPhone with, big fancy lenses, but it's, the technology is there where...
what they should use is the bolt, which they could get from Cinemechanics.
I mean, I think there's something really interesting here that, again, gives people the power of setting up their own studios in a garage, or in their basement. And so your question, which I went on a different tangent, but yes, as far as brands go, I'm still dumbfounded that brands have not used serial content as a way to market themselves. It's hasn't happened. It started years ago with BMW films. And that was like, that was probably like early 2000s.
Yeah, I think you kind of got to be careful with that because people have really good BS noses, right? So if you're going to make content as a brand, it's got to be good. First of all, really good. You got to have, good writers and it's got to be content that somebody wants to watch and not just be like a giant commercial for whatever the product is, I think.
Yeah, those types of things failed when they tried to do that. I worked on a project years ago that was like this shoppable video thing, and it was a whole like sitcom shot about like a fashionista. I think she might have been. It was like Kristen Bell starred in it. It was shot for Target. It was 4 episodes, but it was like, you could click on elements in the movie and find things at Target, but it flopped. It was so forced, But I think if a brand like we've heard that, Starbucks is starting a content studio, and was it Chick-fil-A is starting a streaming service, and there's a couple others, and but I think if you're putting out legitimate content, and where I think it's actually kind of interesting, like when I was reading about Starbucks and they got their content arm going, they have an app already. So people are on this app, they're engaged in this app ordering. They could easily start doing little animations or doing some fun things. And I think it's a very interesting brand awareness play. If somebody can figure it out where it's not an advertisement, but it's actual fun content. And I think it's an interesting thing to maybe put in the mix of an ad budget.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough nut to crack, I think, that one. But it's not going to be Starbucks, I can tell you that. But somebody's going to figure it out, and they're going to get just the right mix of. It's going to be somebody who's doing something interesting that's not tied to their products, and they're going to be probably doing, narrative, filmmaking, whatever, on that thing, and then it's brought to you by whatever. You could use that narrative structure to kind of show behind the scenes stuff. Like here's, there's a YouTube series that I really like. That's this candy company in California that they make candy canes by hand, and they're constantly putting up YouTube videos of this dude making candy canes, and it is awesome. It is so good. So like that kind of thing I think would be really cool. If you do an interesting thing showing that behind the scenes as a content series, it could be pretty slick.
Yeah. So then a local story here that I thought was interesting, when kind of reading about this YouTube thing, was that Best Buy Studios now has a content studio. And they've built out a 70,000 square foot space dedicated to create tech focused content, which Best Buy was always smart about having internal communication videos. Their blue shirts, and they would do a lot of training videos for staff internally. And we know some local people who've been in those. But this is like the full on like production studio with sound stages, audio suites, place to make sets, prop house, to produce dynamic videos. And it's allowing them to double their video production to showcase the tech impact on customers' lives. And it's interesting because this trend of a big company like a Best Buy to bring that stuff in house just makes so much sense. Farming out all of that production, not that these production houses that have been doing this stuff aren't typically great, but as the cost has come down and people can get cameras, it just sort of makes sense to have a place where you can do all of this.
It is interesting. I do know that Best Buy, I think a lot of companies go through these cycles where they farm everything out because they want to cut costs, and then they decide we don't have enough control or we don't like the quality, so then they bring it all back in again. So this could just be that cycle, but it is a really interesting idea, and I wonder, and like you said, Best Buy has always been really smart. Their executive team is really good and really keyed into um, like what's coming. I think that's how they've been able to stand up against, they still have big box stores, right? They're one of the few major retailers that have been able to withstand the onslaught of e-commerce and still have stores that you can actually go to, which is great. But yeah, I think they've always been able to see the future, and that they're seeing a future in content makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it's not far-fetched to think that Best Buy could have a channel or a streaming channel that comes paired with the TV you buy from their store. But yeah, I think this is a really interesting move. I'm curious. I'd be curious to take a tour of it because we don't really have big studios in Minneapolis. We have some pretty nice stages for shooting content. And they, everybody talks about, you can't shoot at Paisley Park anymore, but was a big studio that people would go to. I think this is going to be a trend, though. I think that, the right company is going to figure out they can get into the entertainment space. I think it's a gamble. I think I think you got to have a process to get there. But I think, if you're demoing products and it's a regular part of what you're doing, it seems like it's, it just seems like such a simple thing to do, especially with like there are a lot like MKHD, that Marcus Brownlee, that guy who does all those tech reviews on YouTube
Oh
and
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
Uh-huh.
like he's just such a pro. He's sort of his whole brand is doing tech reviews. Like, why don't they have their own guy like that
Hmm.
um, working for them?
Yeah, the other thing that could be interesting, I don't know when or if they would do this, but Best Buy often um, you can rent the headquarters for like conferences and things like that. I don't know if you're renting it or if they donate the space. I don't know, but if theoretically one could maybe rent time in that studio too, which at, if it's given its Best Buy has probably got high quality electronics, got high quality space, it could be really good for more independent people to be able to have a space. That would be cool.
Yeah, I don't think I wondered that too, and I don't think they will allow that.
No.
No,
Well, we can hope.
it's just legit. We can hope it's just logistically too hard. But I mean,
Leave a comment if you think they should.
it's interesting that also, yeah, they should. Um, we have some small stages, but they're not like massive, where you could have like multiple things set up in different spots, which I think that would be. I don't know if Minneapolis will ever get something like that, but um, they're trying to get things going with the new film commission and 25 million tax incentive. That's not even a drop in a hat to compared to what they get in Georgia by shooting there. But I think with the sort of shifts of content and how content's being produced, it would be a really smart thing if
Hmm.
this city could figure that out. It just seems like there isn't really a great working like massive scale piece. We have some good, you know, good stages, but nothing like state of the art where you just walk in, flick the lights on, or could build a set. Or I mean, there are places, but nothing huge.
Yeah.
That'll be our May Daily dream.
Yeah.
Big
Right.
studio. Do you remember Bad Day? The Bad Day video, Pierre?
I do not, but it's possible that. Yeah, so I was, out of the country from 1996 to 2003, so uh, it may have slotted in that space. I missed a few memes during that time.
So what's interesting about this 1997 is one of the earliest viral videos, and it spread via email, which and even crash servers in this sort of marketing a new era of content. So it's funny because it's clearly it has to be an MPEG because it has to be you have to be able to email it around, and this idea of like the frustration of of technology, but we'll play it and we'll react.
Oh yeah, I have seen this guy. Reminds me of Office Space.
Yeah, exactly.
If you watch any YouTube, there's a version of that where the guy throws his
Ooh,
computer in the dumpster that it always gets cut into
yeah.
all these videos.
Well, and also they talk in the article too about like how stuff's not plugged in. It's like you start to notice things.
Yeah.
It's interesting how the it's like one of the first viral videos, and it's shared via email. I just remember being in college and like somebody would start sharing something on the all students email. So there was always little like inside jokes and stuff there, and now we've migrated from email to a full on, it gets shared on Twitter or the web. And then pretty soon, like all these things pick it up. You remember that it's not a way back thing, but it was over COVID. There was that guy who was skateboarding and drinking ocean spray, and dog face or whatever, and then like Fleetwood Mac Fleetwood was skateboarding and drinking ocean spray, and it just spread like crazy.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of funny how this stuff happens, and how a video will like spread like wildfire. It's such a weird thing. So anywho,
if you're familiar with the NPR show called Wait Don't Tell Me. But over the the episode last weekend, they had a thing about the very first spam. Because they had Eric Idle, the Monty Python guy who did spam a lot. So they were asking him questions about email spam, and the very first email spam, I just learned this, was actually on Usenet, and it was about Jesus. Jesus is coming. You should be prepared. So there we go. Another way back thing. That was a good one. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, hit the bell, ring the bell, do the thing. Put a comment.
If you have a story you'd like to share or a site you'd like to review, please drop us a line, a comment. Until next time. Made Daily.